Geology? Geology! Geology! Welcome everybody to the Mini Geology radio show. This is Daniel Minizini, your inquisitive geologist. Welcome to KPFT HD2 channel, Mini Geology radio show, your weekly show about geology and the connection with society at large. Today we are going to talk about the International Association for Geoscience Diversity. It's an international association for the diversity of the geologists and geoscientists worldwide, international, a non-profit organization that is dedicated to creating access and inclusion for people with disabilities in the geosciences. And today we'll talk with the Executive Director, Chris Atchison. Chris is a professor of geoscience education and School of Education and Department of Geology at the University of Cincinnati, Ohio. Chris, very welcome to the program.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for having me.
Chris, would you like to introduce yourself and please pronounce better your last name that I couldn't?
So my name is Chris Atchison. As Daniel indicated, I'm an associate professor at the University of Cincinnati in Ohio. I'm also the executive director of the International Association for Geoscience Diversity.
Chris, let's talk about the association. The Association for Geoscience Diversity.
Okay.
It was founded in 2008, I read in the website, and officially it is established in 2015. So who inspired this?
There's a lot of different things that actually inspired the formation of this. In 2008, actually when I was working on my doctorate at Ohio State University, I was looking for resources to support students with disabilities, and at various Geological Society of America national meetings, I was seeing very few people presenting on how they were supporting students. Maybe they were blind, or maybe they were deaf or hard of hearing, in their introductory courses, realizing that everyone that was giving these presentations had figured out how to best support those students in their introductory courses. It was at this time that I started to realize that there were no resources available to people, and their campuses or their offices of disability services on their campuses weren't necessarily the resource for them to best get that support. So they were left to figure this out on their own.
What do you mean when you say resources?
So instructional resources. So if you're teaching someone, you're a sedimentologist, so if you were teaching someone on fluvial geology or something similar, and you had graphs or things that you needed your students to visualize,
or rocks.
And you had a student who had a visual disability, how were you actually going to support them? So if you go to your Office of Disability Service and say, hey, I'm teaching this concept, but I'm not really sure how to go about supporting these students, sometimes you might find support from that office. Sometimes they might not have that level of expertise.
Oh, so the support you are talking about is the support for the instructors, the professors, the teachers.
That's right. That's right. So to teach them how to best teach their students.
And how comes that you came up with this idea? Did you have any personal experience, or did you see specific people on your campus?
So at first I didn't have any experience. No, I mean, it was the fact that there needed to be some kind of a network, some network of people sharing these resources, because someone might create something really valuable for a specific student, but then never use that again once the student finished their class. So all those great resources would probably go into a drawer, never to be seen again. So the idea was to develop a network of people, a network to enable people to share those resources for students who entered into a geology introductory course as an elective, and to continue to engage them and to keep them interested in the science.
And you said, Chris, this is at the beginning. What about then? When did you start meeting students with disabilities?
Yep, great question. So then, as I continued through my dissertation work, I was actually creating a virtual reality simulation of Mammoth Cave National Park. I wanted people to be able to visit Mammoth Cave without actually being there. So it was never really focused on supporting a student with a mobility disability, but it was about giving someone, say, in California, an opportunity to visit Mammoth Cave without actually traveling to Western Kentucky to be there. So we were creating a simulation, a virtual reality simulation to get them, to give them access. And then once we had created this simulation, I wanted to evaluate its effectiveness against the real thing. And to do that, I came up with this crazy idea of taking students who were wheelchair users into the cave because I could be sure that they had never been in a cave before. So to compare the virtual reality simulation to the real thing, I wanted them to have a true sense of what the experience was like from the first time.
What did it happen?
Well, so I took 6 students in. It was about a year and a half of logistical planning to get them into the cave, and a lot of permissions and a lot of people that had to sign off on this. And so I recruited 6 students, and none of those students were geology majors. None of them had had a geology course probably since the time they were in 8th grade. And I took them into the cave, and their experience of seeing this for the very first time was really eye-opening. It really changed the trajectory of my career at that point. I had no idea what I was doing, and all 6 of them were so open and transparent and honest with me and telling me about their experience and telling me about my biases and my stereotypes and my misconceptions. They were so open and honest with me.
Tell us something about what were they telling you?
How ableist I was actually being, how my assumptions of what someone can and can't do were based on my own perspective as an able-bodied geoscientist. So everything that I had done as a geologist, all the field work, all the physically rigorous field work, was my perspective. And so just like most everyone else, that's the perspective that we see as a geoscientist, and that's what we expect. And if you can't physically go out and do this work, then perhaps you can't be a geoscientist. And they really put me in my place.
And this is when the 6 students, the chair users, they were in the real cave?
Yes.
And then what did it happen when you showed them the 3D virtual reality of Mammoth Cave?
To be honest, I don't even remember.
Oh, you didn't care anymore at that time.
Exactly, because you know what? At the point that we went into the cave and we shared that experience together, and I saw the change in them and how seeing something for the very first time, seeing something that they never thought possible for the very first time, it made me realize that this is something that we need to focus on. There's a cultural issue in the geosciences in the geosciences that needed to be addressed. That we are promoting this science to a specific ableistic persona that simply isn't the case. It shouldn't be the case.
So let's talk about this perception problem, because what is the perception of the regular geologists, the one that don't have any disability? Are those geologists aware about geologists that have disability? Because most of the time we don't see them, or very rarely.
Yeah, that's very true. And in 2008, when I started working on this, and it actually wasn't until about 2009, almost 2010, when I finished my project and I started presenting at various conferences about this work, that it wasn't well received. And in fact, it was some very prominent structural and field scientists who approached me asking me why I was attacking field geology. I guess the perception that I was giving off by trying to promote accessibility was that I was attempting to do away with field geology, with field camps and field courses, and that simply wasn't the case.
Instead, what were you proposing?
I was proposing to look at the way we teach field geology differently.
In which sense you were suggesting your audience to change?
So the use of multiple techniques or multiple ways of presenting the material. And honestly, at the time, I still didn't know what I was talking about. And I'm still, even to this day, I'm still learning. Every time I go out with colleagues and students, I learn something new every day. But as I've progressed through this work, I'm starting now to realize that there's more than one way to teach the science, both in the classroom, in the laboratory, and in the field, that students don't all learn the same way. They don't all access the content the same way. And so when we're in the field, it's the same thing. We need to be able to give them multiple representations of the concepts we're trying to present.
All right. So when you are in the field with the chair users, geologists, or geologists with disabilities, and you are in the field, in the real field, how do you teach differently with respect to students that they don't have disabilities?
So if you have a group of students with mixed abilities, so you have students that do not have any physical disabilities, or you have students who are wheelchair users who have visual or hearing disabilities. For example, if we have a group of students who are wheelchair users in the field, and we know we're going to a site that is physically inaccessible for someone in a chair, then it's about site selection. So if you can select a site where those students have a visual understanding of where the group physically is, if they can see it from a broader perspective, if they can see where the group is, if a group is physically on an outcrop, can you get those students to a location where they can see the outcrop, maybe a bigger, broader perspective of the outcrop than just being right physically on top of it? That would be one way. The other way is what additional information are you presenting to those students that might be different than their colleagues? So, for instance, if their peers are on the outcrop and they're using their hand lenses to look at the lithology, they might be taking strike and dip measurements. They might be doing various things, taking strata measurements, whatever. What the students who physically cannot get to the outcrop might have would be aerial photography, thin sections, hand samples, things that are not made available to their colleagues, to their peers, for them to make their own observations of the site from a different vantage point, from a different perspective.
Interesting.
And then what you do is that you bring the entire group together and you have your debrief, or you have your teaching sessions when all of the students are together. And then you enable each of those groups of students to be experts in the observations that they made, and to share those observations with the rest of the group. And what happens is this becomes a very holistic, inclusive community of learning, where all students are learning from one another, and their observations from different vantage points and perspectives are extremely valued.
So, Chris, you're suggesting that if you have, I like the term mixability, so a group with students that are, let's say, normal or with disabilities, you provide them two different sets of data. It's not that you give everything to the students without disability and something less to the ones with disabilities is that you give them two different data sets.
Yeah, you do. You're giving them two different data sets that relate to the same experience.
Yes.
So, and that's key. They have to have the same experience. All too often, I've seen this throughout the almost 12 years that we've been doing this, is that a student who physically can't get into the field are given a completely different experience to complete the assignment. And oftentimes, that student isn't included in the community of learning. It's the social inclusion that they're being excluded from, the social experience.
And about the social experience and the perception bias that we are tackling right now, another perception it could be that the geologists or geoscientists with disabilities, they may produce less. Do they produce less?
You produce less what, though? What is it do you think they're producing less of?
Well, this could be a bias of, let's say, talking about workforce. In trying to allow you to explain if, and I think they don't produce less, how do we know that? Or how do we convince the workforce and the employers, or maybe the professors, the ones that they decide to invite disabled students in their departments, that this is not true?
Yeah, and that's the case. How do we know if we haven't done it? So anybody who is adequately trained to do a job will produce. And so if students aren't given an opportunity to be a part of this type of training, then of course they're not going to produce. And so the goal here is to provide the level of training that anyone would need to be able to do the job. And so as we progress into this push for accessibility and inclusion, the training is going to increase, but we're also going to start to see more and more students with disabilities participating and transitioning into geoscience careers. Right now, we have very few people that we can look to as professional geoscientists with disabilities in the workforce.
How do we
break? And a lot of those people have acquired their disabilities, so they might have already been trained as a geologist before they've had a disabling disability or a disabling condition or a degenerative condition or an accident that caused their disability.
So, okay, so you say that the geoscientists, they acquire the disability once they already have a professional position, but then they quit, in a sense, because they don't find a proper workspace?
Yeah, a lot of times. So a lot of what we're starting to see right now, is our aging geoscience workforce who are acquiring disabilities, having to retire early or move into a different aspect of their career because of this disability, because we're not providing appropriate accommodations or supporting them to continue to stay in their career. We have a great big workforce of people. How are we keeping them engaged through an acquired disability?
Chris, it seems that this is a vicious loop that we have to break. So we see few geologists with disabilities because educators, they don't have the tools to teach them geology or geoscience, and therefore they don't form a workforce, and we don't see geoscientists with disabilities in the workplace. So how do we break this?
That's exactly what we're seeing. The educators are not. Well, I mean, let's face it. A lot of our geoscience faculty are not trained educators, and if they don't have the tools to teach, let alone the tools to teach inclusively, we're not able to get students that need those supports progressing through certificate programs, through degree programs, into careers, right? That's one aspect of why the IAGD was created, to be able to support those faculty, those instructors, those graduate teaching assistants in how to teach accessibly and inclusively to support all their students.
Would you start focusing on education on the employers and the workforce to break this?
Yeah, that's a challenge. So far, we've been focusing on the instruction. We've been focusing on the academics, because if we can't support the students we have in our classrooms, then there's no reason to focus on the careers. But since 2008, since we've started doing this in 2008, the awareness is there. You're hard pressed to go anywhere where somebody doesn't see the value of creating an accessible and inclusive classroom environment. Now the issue is, okay, we've got more and more students that we're seeing coming up through this academic pathway. Now we need to start reaching out to our industry and say, look at the data. There's plenty of data from other STEM industries, not specifically to the geosciences, that show individuals with disabilities in the workforce enhances innovation and productivity. It's in the literature. It's in the research. We need to get our industries, specifically in the geoscience industries, to see the value of integrating geoscientists with disabilities into their workforce.
Where would you start from? Like if you were here in Houston, where we have plenty of employers related to geology. Actually, we have 5,000 firms related to geoscience, geochemical, oil, petroleum geologist, planetary geology with NASA, etc., even medical geology with the medical center. Where would you start from?
It's a great question, and honestly, we started from the academic standpoint. We started with awareness, and when you look at the types of careers available, you've got to start the same way. You've got to start with awareness, and it has to be where industry employers need to critically look at their geoscience, the jobs available, and look at what types of jobs can be done, what the skill sets are needed to be able to do those jobs. A lot of times you're not going to see that people with disabilities are not good candidates. They're going to be great candidates for a lot of these jobs, but we're looking at it through our traditional lens of able-bodied field practitioners. So few of our positions today are going out into the field daily to collect data, to create maps, to do all those things that we did 50 years ago. That's just not the way that our industry works anymore. The one example that I like to show here, and you just said it, planetary geology. How many of us have been to Mars? Yet how much do we really know about Mars? Now, I also understand that we use our field geology here on Earth as an analog for the structural geology that we see on Mars from a distance. I understand that. But a lot of our students, or a lot of our future geoscience candidates, if they're trained properly, are going to be able to visualize the exact same things and never have to step foot in the field.
Chris, we understand through your arguments that we lack awareness, and so you are working on this awareness. And this perception we have, the lack of understanding of geologists with disabilities, it results in barriers, and they create barriers for people with disabilities. How do we reduce these barriers, and what are the barriers that we build, even if we don't even know we're building barriers?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And sometimes, like you said, we don't know the barriers that we're building. And, I am not, and I want it to be clear, I'm not an expert in the work that I do. Because if I'm doing this work and not listening to the students and the geoscientists that I'm trying to support, then how do I know that I'm supporting them? So we need to listen to the students. We need to listen to the experts, the geoscientists who have disabilities. Everybody is going to have different barriers. You're not going to be able to support everyone by breaking down one single barrier. Everybody's going to have multiple barriers, and they're all going to be different. So when it comes down to it, it's about that awareness, like we just talked about. It's about looking at the way that we've traditionally done things and adding in multiple ways of doing the same thing and listening to the experts who are the students, who are the geoscientists who have disabilities, and learning from them. So we really can't sit here, and there's no one-size-fits-all for any of this, which is the challenge, which is why not a lot of people do this work, and I completely understand that. It's a logistical issue, it's a liability issue that isn't going to go away, and it's certainly not an inexpensive thing to do. So I understand why people kind of avoid trying to do this as much as possible, but it's building, and we're not going to be able to avoid this for much longer.
Would it be useful for you to work and collaborate with professors that they have this kind of disabilities?
Yeah, it is. It's very useful, and I have. And again, like I said before, it's the students and it's the faculty, it's geoscientists with disabilities whom I learn the most from.
Do you have or do you know professors that they have disabilities that they are working in some specific campus?
I do. We have a lot of colleagues, a lot of members of the IAGD that we do reach out to. I reach out to very frequently and ask questions and get their perspective on things.
Is there a particular region in the world or in the country that is unbiased and they offer better positions for the geologists with disabilities?
Not that I've found. I've seen, one of the big things that we're trying to do at the IAGD right now is to identify these programs and departments and employers and industries who want to learn more, who are currently offering accessible or an inclusive field course or field program, who want this challenge, if you will, of supporting all students and through what they're doing, through their careers and in their programs and their courses. We want, one of the biggest things we're trying to do is trying to identify these folks and to try to create kind of this synergy, kind of a repository of accessible field courses, this collaborative network to share ideas and to continue to grow this. Really often I get emails from students who are looking for a field camp because they have to have a field camp to be able to graduate with their undergrad. But they might have a disability or they might have a condition that's going to limit a lot of things that they're going to be required to do. And so I'm constantly looking for opportunities for students to participate in field learning experiences. And so we're always looking for people to be able to send them to.
Christopher, we're in conversation with Christopher Atchison, Professor of Geoscience Education at the University of Cincinnati. Chris, tell me again your last name?
Atchison.
All right. So, Chris, we start the conversation talking about this point of view of the chair users, geologists in the Mammoth Cave. Tell me now something about the point of view of your colleagues, the professors, the ones that they already have a position, but they have disabilities. How do they see the world? How do they see how the department works with their different mindset?
Well, I think, and again, I can't speak for them. I can't speak for how they see the profession, how they see their colleagues, how they see their departments. What I've seen is that a lot of times faculty or instructors who acquire a disability are faced with an uphill battle a lot of times of constantly self-advocating for basic resources and supports and accommodations, just like in any other workplace. But what is so exciting is that we've created this network of people to share ideas and ways of accomplishing or getting the things that they're needed, the most basic things that people need to be able to be successful in their careers, whether they're in academia or in the geoscience industry or so on. But I've seen that we have a long way to go in the work that we're doing. And this, although the awareness is there and people realize that this is something that needs to be addressed, the way of actually going about fixing the problem is what is still the biggest challenge.
So the International Association for Geoscience Diversity is dedicated to creating access and inclusion for people with disabilities in geoscience in general. Is there anything similar in other sciences?
So there is. So if you look at chemistry, there's a big group of chemists with disabilities that has been around for a really long time. But between the two, there's very little, because a lot of times what the IAGD was founded upon was that field focus. And so what we're finding is that a lot of the other field-focused disciplines are reaching out to us as a way of learning about how we're going about doing things. What we don't do a very good job of is looking at the way that accessibility is developed in the laboratory, which is what the Chemists with Disabilities group is really focused on. And so we certainly don't have to own everything, and we have a lot to learn from the other sciences. But a lot of what we're doing is the field focus, and we're able to share that out with a lot of the other field disciplines.
What about when you compare yourself with the rest of the world in the other associations in other countries? Do you find anything inspirational?
Yeah, there is. I've had an opportunity to work over in Europe a little bit, and there's some organizations, there's some grassroots organizations that are trying to do this and that have been doing this, and we've been able to kind of expand our reach to include a lot of those organizations. The IAGD, 2 years ago, we were able to partner with the Geological Society of London to create our first chapter. And so now we have a chapter in England or in the UK called Diversity in the Geosciences. And although they're a chapter of the IAGD, their focus is a lot more broad because of the needs that they have specific to their region. And so they're not just focusing on disability, but they're also focusing on all the other aspects of diversity, race, gender, sexual orientation, and so on, that the IAGD as a whole isn't necessarily focused on. Although disability transcends all of diversity, we're certainly not excluding those other aspects of diversity. But our primary focus is on disability, on supporting everyone with disability.
What about the relationship between disabilities and sex, race, ethnicity, age? Are they related or they are not related?
I would not say that they're related, but you're going to find disability transcending all of diversity. and especially when you have an intersection of diversity or an intersection of underrepresented identities, the issues, the challenges, the barriers that people face are heightened. And so we're always looking at underrepresented identity as it relates to disability and commonly underrepresented groups as being a challenge that we all need to address.
Would you consider aging a disability?
I wouldn't consider aging a disability, although there are disabling conditions as a result of age. A lot of times those conditions are non-apparent. And so a lot of people, even for our youngest students, when you don't see a disability, the common assumption in our society is that someone is making it up. And so whether you are aging and you acquire a disability or you're young and you have a disability that is non-apparent, a lot of times our first reaction is to assume that person doesn't have a disability and that they don't require or they don't need that extra help to be able to be successful.
Tell us more about these disabilities that we can't see, and tell us also what are the main disabilities of the geoscientists.
I wouldn't say there's any one main disability of a geoscientist, but a lot of times when someone has a chronic illness, whether it be someone who has joint problems or who has asthma or who has something that doesn't necessarily show up every single day but might show up at various times, you have one of those students who is conducting or who is a part of your field camp, and they might have a condition that arises on a certain day, and they inform their instructor that they're not going to be able to go into the field today because they can't walk because of this, because of the pain that they have. And a lot of times instructors just assume that student just doesn't want to go in the field that day, that they're being lazy. And that's not the case. But this is something that we're starting to see more and more of. And you also need to think about mental health as a disability. It is one of the primary conditions that everyone is facing. And we need to get a handle on it, at least from the understanding perspective.
Definitely. So the disabilities, they are, as you said, physical, they are cognitive, and maybe also sensory. Yeah,
they're sensory, they're physical, they're cognitive, they're developmental if you start thinking about autism. And so there's a wide range or a spectrum of ability that we all fall on, but we all need to consider how we're supporting the students who need the accommodations to be able to participate and to be able to conduct field work, laboratory work, and to be successful in these programs to go for future careers.
Chris, what can you describe us the kind of members that the International Association for Geoscience Diversity has?
It's all across the board. We have the IAGD is represented currently in over 40 countries around the world, and in those 40 countries we have geoscientists, we have non-geoscientists, we have students, we have faculty, we have practitioners, we have parents, we have people who are, we have other organizations that focus on disability services, you name it. Anyone who is interested in supporting people with disabilities, who are interested in the geosciences or the earth sciences in general, people with, people without disabilities, you're going to find everybody in the network.
Are there more the members with disabilities or the members that they are educators and they try to help the students with disabilities?
You know what? I'm not really sure, because those aren't things that we ask and those aren't things that really matter. the point is that regardless if you have a disability or not, that we're all working towards the same thing. We all have the same vision, is to create accessible and inclusive pathways to geoscience careers. We want to create access to the earth. We want people to be supportive, be supported, and we want to develop a community for people to belong to.
Could it be a good idea, or probably you already had it, to connect with UNESCO when they decide that they have to protect a very special natural place and start collaborating with them in order to give access to people with disability to these beautiful landscapes that are geomorphological landscape, and they have to be explained by geologists?
You know, absolutely. I would love to. We haven't done anything with UNESCO and their World Heritage, the World Heritage sites, but I would love to. I would love to be able to collaborate with them, to look at their sites, understanding that it would be very difficult. It almost ranks up there with a lot of our national parks, and in that some sites just are inherently inaccessible, and there's really not a whole lot you can do about that. But looking at it from the way of, well, how can we do the best that we can? A lot of the national parks here in the U.S. are doing a fantastic job of trying to be as accessible and inclusive for as much of the U.S. or the public as possible. I would really love to be able to work with UNESCO to do the same, or to see how we can go about doing the same.
Chris, how do you support your association, the International Association for Geoscience Diversity?
Everything that we do is through donations. Everybody, the entire IAGD executive committee, we all have day jobs. We all volunteer our time to do this work. None of us get paid to do any of this work. Everything that we raise, all the donations that we bring in, go to support the programs that we offer.
So what would you say to the audience if you could pitch in here in order to let the audience help you and help the Association for Geoscience Diversity?
Very great question. So we need everybody's help. We need everyone to consider how they are making an impact for the future of earth science accessibility. And so we do that. The IAGD as an organization does that by providing opportunities for students and faculty with disabilities to get into the field, to learn about the science firsthand. We have various programs where we offer workshops for teachers, for faculty, for instructors, for graduate assistants to learn how to design inclusive curricula and to include and accommodate students with disabilities in their courses. We provide awards for people who are going above and beyond in their research or in their classroom to support students with disabilities. We exhibit the IAGD as often as possible at national conferences, at regional conferences, to be able to share those resources out. All of these things cost money that we raise to support.
And what about if somebody listening would like to donate? Where do they go?
So they could go to the IAGD.org. It's the IAGD.org. And at the very top of the webpage, there is a red button that they can click on to donate. They can go to the page and learn about the IAGD Foundation. When it was established, it is a nonprofit 501c3 organization. On the webpage, they could also go. There's a separate link to the IAGD Foundation that gives the history of how the IAGD Foundation became. How it formed, the historical perspective, gives different ways to donate. They can donate through PayPal. They can donate through a check in the mail. They can do employer matching gifts. We've had some employees at various geoscience companies that they made a gift and their employer actually matched that gift, so that's always a good thing.
You're right. We have to remember these things. Also for the radio, KPFT here, it's based everything on donations of the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and we will also accept securities. So any donor-advised funds or stocks that people would like to donate, we can accept those as well. And we're very appreciative of those things.
Chris, what are the main achievements of the International Association for Geoscience Diversity?
I think that what I'm most proud of is how big this organization has become, not in terms of size, but in terms of awareness and people now considering accessibility in their everyday work. So more often than not, people, when they start thinking about new courses or field work, a lot of times people are considering accessibility, how students with various abilities are able to get into the field to do the work. I'm most proud of the accessible field trips that the IAGD offers. When we offer an accessible field trip, which we do sometimes multiple times a year, we offer it at completely no cost to the participants.
What does it mean, accessible field trip?
So let me give you an example. This every year during the Geological Society of America, we offer a field trip. Sometimes it's a one-day trip. Most recently, we've been doing a couple of days, where our field trips span a couple of days, either before or after the GSA meeting, where we take people into the field, and the field trip itself is completely accessible, and we do our best to go and scout the field sites, and we consider the concepts and the content and the geoscience information that we're going to be presenting and how to get the most access and inclusion at those sites as possible.
Chris, what is the threshold that you use when you say accessible? Do you think to a chair user, or what is the threshold of accessibility?
All of the above. All of the above. Understanding, if we go back to what we were talking about originally, that the way that when we take people into the field, we consider this multiple representation of the information that's going to reach as many people as possible, understanding that we're not ever going to create 100% access for everyone. But the fact that we have people there, it's full participation in the social community of learning that we're most trying to achieve.
Are you already working on the next GSA accessible field trip?
We are. My colleague, Dr. Anita Marshall, is taking the lead on the 2020 field trip that will be in Montreal, Canada. I believe it's next October.
All right, October 2020, accessible field trip with the GSA. What about the ongoing work? What are you working on now? And I know you're a volunteer, and you are a professor at the University of Cincinnati, but passion is everything, and I bet that you are probably working harder on these topics than in other ones that officially you have to follow. What are your ongoing work related to the geoscience diversity?
So the ongoing work, a lot of the things that are taking up a lot of my time right now, I'm going out and I'm giving presentations and talks, and I'm working with geoscience departments at various universities and sharing the work of the IAGD and meeting one-on-one with faculty, trying to help them consider the work that they do and how they can make their work more accessible and more inclusive. I've been working with various professional societies to get them considering from a very broad perspective how their organization is considering accessibility and inclusion. A lot of the research that I'm doing, we're starting to look more at how we're supporting individuals with autism, not only in the geosciences but in the STEM disciplines broadly. But we go back to our roots. One of our main things, though, from where this all started, was to look at instructional inclusiveness, instructional accessibility, especially as it relates to field-based learning. And those accessible field trips are always going to be one of our priorities.
Do you think that this is something achievable in few years, or is a generational time span?
For what specifically?
Well, for the main points that you depicted related to accessibility to the field trips and having a different mindset.
I think the mindset for the geosciences specifically, I think it's always going to be what we are at right now from the perspective that the geosciences are inherently field focused. Although that there are many things about the geosciences that have nothing to do with actually being in the field, and that's an area that we need to improve upon, and that's an area that we need to build, because we're even by the IAGD focusing on the field-focused sciences predominantly, we're excluding a lot of people who that's not their interest. They might not want to be field geologists, and we understand that, and we need to do a better job of supporting all of our future geoscientists by not just focusing on the field only.
Chris, we still have 3-4 minutes, and I would like to allow you to talk, to express those topics that you didn't do during our chat, and to address the educators and also the geologists with disabilities, and tell them your message. So the mic is yours. Use the radio program as a megaphone.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Daniel. I think a lot of what I would encourage people to do is to learn as much as they can about access and inclusion, to reach out to us at the IAGD for help, for guidance, for ideas. Join the listserv. People can certainly, when they go to the website, they can create a profile, and that profile will actually connect them with the listserv. The IAGD is a completely free organization to be a part of. There is no cost to be a member of the IAGD. Everything that we do is freely accessible. The resources that we have on the website, the listserv is one of the biggest resources that we have. By creating a profile on the website, you'll actually be added to the listserv, which connects you with thousands of other geoscientists around the world, and to share ideas, to share resources, to share suggestions and opportunities for getting people involved and included in accessible opportunities. But understanding that the IAGD, we need the support of your listeners. We need the support of our community to make these things happen. And as one of those big things, as I've mentioned before, the accessible field trip in 2020, every field trip that we've offered in the past has been completely free of charge to our students and to our faculty with disabilities who participate in that. And we always need funds to be able to make those go. Every field trip that we offer is around $9,000 or $10,000 to run, and a lot of the times we raise those funds through donations from individuals, from companies, from employer matching gifts. So we are always looking for people to support. If anyone would like to speak to me about how a donation would be used in the programs that we run, I'd be happy to talk with anybody about that.
Thank you so much, Christopher. Christopher Atchison, Professor of Geoscience Education at the School of Education and the Department of Geology in the University of Cincinnati in Ohio. It has been a pleasure to give you the mic as a megaphone to allow our community to grow, to be more aware about our fellow colleagues with disabilities, and to inspire us to listen to the geologists with disabilities. I think that you taught us a lot I learned from you today, and I'm proud that you are doing these things as a volunteer. Thank you, Chris.
Daniel, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to share this with you today.
So remain on the line, Chris, because then I would like to ask you the names of some of the geologists with disabilities and inviting them to come in here to KPFT, which would be something very important to listen to their voices, as you suggested. And this was another program of Mini Geology radio show from KPFT HD2 channel. This is Daniel Minizini, your inquisitive geologist, and you are going to find this program in the minigeology.com, which is a YouTube channel. You can write me at minigeology@gmail.com, and you can follow also the Twitter account, minigeology. So thank you, everybody, and thank you again to Christopher Atchison.